I've said it many a times that Werewolf the Apocalypse is pretty much, without a doubt, my favorite tabletop RPG. And I've never really expressed too specifically on why. There's a lot of videos people have done on these settings and all these White Wolf games and every other game where they kind of go through the setting and the rules and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not really gonna go through all the details of how the world of Werewolf the Apocalypse really works. I'm just gonna focus on why I like it so much. And you know, it's kind of funny that most of the time, almost like 99% of the time, when I talk with people and mention that I'm really into Werewolf the Apocalypse and all the other werewolf games, the Werewolf Wild West and Werewolf Dark Ages and all that sort of stuff, it's the same thing, basically just different time period with a different little scheme going on in the plot of things and all that sort of stuff. Usually people tend to respond either that they are also into it, and if they're not into it, they tend to pretty much always have the reason of, I couldn't really get into the whole setting of the whole spirit world thing and the whole cosmology thing. I really didn't quite get it and all that sort of stuff. And I understand how comparing it to like a Vampire the Masquerade, there's a lot more stuff that you haven't like seen before, because you know, in something like Vampire the Masquerade, the game's setting has been used so many times as a template for so many vampire movies that take place in modern day. So if you watch like Blade and other movies like that where vampires are in the modern age and vampires are these businessmen and all that sort of stuff, it's very easy to wrap your head around the imagery and the way the Vampire the Masquerade works. But with Werewolf the Apocalypse, it's always like that it's something that is at the same time in the book pretty vague, and at the same time it's pretty clear, you know. The spirit world and what's the werewolf's position in the world when you think about all that spirit stuff and all that. Basically, why I like the werewolf setting is so much is, well, first of all, werewolves themselves are fucking awesome. You know, the ability basically is like something like the Hulk or something where you can just, you know, like power on, transform into this killing machine form that's a werewolf and all that sort of stuff. And then the werewolves are wielding like magic weapons and all that sort of stuff. It's just too awesome for me to not love it already due to that. But the main reason why I really like it is the spirit world stuff. And it's because it's done in this very specific way. It's done in this very like shamanistic way. I would consider, since all the werewolves, whether you're a medicine man, whether you're somebody who's like stuck behind a desk, whether you're somebody who's like an old and frail like a wise man, or if you're like a tracker or something, every single werewolf is also a warrior at the same time. It's just that those that are born to be warriors in the setting are just better warriors, but there's no werewolf character who wouldn't be able to fight off enemies, because they can all transform into this werewolf form where they are immensely strong and have long sharp nails and teeth and all that. And they have basically a healing factor that's you know, insanely powerful and all that. So basically, whatever type of character you're making, you're at the same time part warrior. So that's why when I think about the shamanistic elements, I think of them all pretty much as these shamanistic warriors. If I would describe Werewolf the Apocalypse in a like what are the werewolves like in the game, I would say that they are shaman warriors, because you know, the spirit world stuff is very much like the kind of lore and spiritual stuff of the Native Americans, or many tribal native cultures like Polynesians or like South American tribes and all that sort of stuff, all these African tribes and that sort of stuff, where you have like these ancestor spirits and you have like these spirit of the buffalo, these these type of spiritual entities that you can, you know, converse for guidance with, and they are like these forces of nature and all this sort of stuff. It's like well, in a werewolf, basically, the basic gist of the spirit world is that there is a spirit world and there is the material world of the world, basically, that we know. And in the werewolf setting, werewolves are basically a secret society. They are a secret society of these pack animals, these werewolves that act in a very like tribal society that has a very animalistic hierarchy to it. It could be compared to like a Native American tribe, or it could be even compared to like a crime gang or something, where there's a clear hierarchy of the baddest badass rules the tribe, and if you think you're better than them, you can challenge his authority. But you know, if you lose in that challenge, you know, you're the bitch for the rest of your days, pretty much. So yeah, unless you're sure you can beat the tougher guys, then you know. I'm pretty much going off the subject a little bit here, but anyway, the basic thing with that is that I really like the concept of having the spirit world. I really like it that you know, since in the world it's the there's this gauntlet between the material and the spiritual, and the werewolves are the very rare creature that can go through that gauntlet. They can rip a tear into the gauntlet and just step through reality into another reality. And I love describing that stuff when I'm the GM. I love describing what the Umbra, the spiritual world, is like. I like to describe how it differentiates from this world, what the sensations are. It's not just that things look a little different or stuff like that. You have all your senses on you, so it feels different, it looks different, it smells different, it sounds different, and all these different senses are affected, and I really like the fact that the spirit world makes werewolf a lot more of a high fantasy setting than say a vampire or something. Of course you can play vampire where you would shoot like fireballs out of your hands and all that sort of stuff. And you know, I've mentioned many times that I like low fantasy more than high fantasy, but with werewolf I really like to indulge in the high fantasy aspects of the setting, meaning pretty much that when it comes to the spirit world, there's like these outlines in the book. There's like one chapter on the spirit world, and it's like these outlines of, okay, this is how it pretty much works. This is what you can pretty much do there, and this is kind of the kind of threats that you can face there, and this sort of stuff. The rest, it's all up to you. That's sort of, it hands it out like here you go. Like, I'm sure if you would play werewolf or with different GMs that have never met each other, the Umbra would be described pretty differently. You know, of course, the basic gist of the idea would be there, but a lot of the details would be very different. I have few different features that I like to put there as, you know, these little images for myself that I really like to project on the players. At this point, when I'm running Werewolf the Wild West, I like to put aquatic features into the Umbra. I like to describe how things flow a bit like they are underwater. I like it to feel like the air feels like it's this freezing cold blizzard air, even though it doesn't feel cold. If you know the sensation of freezing air in the dead of winter, being breathed in and exhaled into this mist, that's sort of how the air feels, and how it feels a little bit like moon-like gravity, not totally, but a little bit like your like underwater type of feel, and how it's always like a starlit sky out there, and how these huge ass comets are kind of floating in the air with these werewolf runes on them, and how spirits, like common spirits that float around, are a lot like these underwater creatures that kind of float like snakes in there, or leap in almost like slow motion, like jackrabbits or something there, and this sort of because the Umbra is a center of meditation for the werewolves. It's like if you don't like to go to the Umbra too much in your life, you at least go there or concentrate on its presence when you meditate, and when you concentrate on the spirits and all this sort of stuff, because werewolves, that's another feature about the whole spirit world that I like, that for werewolves the physical world is as familiar as the spiritual world, or I should say the spiritual world is as familiar as the physical world. If you can imagine, how familiar this feels, all this, how your hands feel when they move in the air in this physical world, how it feels to breathe air, how it feels to drink something, how it feels to get exhausted and pant and suck air into yourself, how it feels to hear something in the distance, and all that sort of stuff. And then there's this other world where all those things are slightly different, and sometimes when you go deep enough into the spirit world, they are very different, and to have them as familiar to yourself as this physical realm, basically. And if you happen to be a Metis, a werewolf that's, in Werewolf the Apocalypse, all werewolves are the progeny of a mortal and a werewolf. Whether it be a wolf and a werewolf, or a human and a werewolf, you can be a wolf that turns into a werewolf and a human, or you can be a human that turns into a werewolf and a wolf. Anyway, if two werewolves have a child, then that child's natural form is the werewolf form, but that is not part of the natural equation, and those children are born always sterile, and they are always born deformed. They are called Metis. And due to their deformity, they are viewed as very, weak, and they are the pure image of, the degeneration of werewolves. Since werewolves pride themselves in pure blood and all these lineage and these family lines and all that sort of stuff. So a Metis is pretty much the opposite of all that, and the dark side of all that. So usually the parents of a Metis are severely punished, and the Metis is many times, excommunicated or kept in the society as basically a piece of shit. Anyway, the thing that I was about to say about the Metis is that for them, the spirit world is more familiar than the physical world, and to include that in the game if somebody's playing a Metis is also very interesting. And all this sort of how the spirits are floating in there, how you can communicate with them, how you can summon them if they are weaker than you or they respect you enough, or if you are summoned by the spirits to do things for them. If you look for a spirit and want them to do something for you, you better prepare to be ready to do something for them, or if they even comply with you, And all this sort of stuff, how a lot of the tribes, a lot of the packs are centered around some sort of a spiritual centerpiece, which is a totem. It doesn't have to be a totem pole. It can be some sort of a talisman, some sort of a rock formation, some sort of an item, anything like that that represents a powerful spirit that they worship and whose will they do basically, and whose gifts they enjoy due to its worship. All these sort of spirit of the totem of the bear and totem of the buffalo, totem of the eagle, all these sort of totems, and all these sort of different werewolf tribes prefer a certain specific totem spirit. And when when these shaman warriors forge weapons for themselves, they don't just make themselves a sword. They make themselves a sword that they house a spirit of war in, some sort of an angry spirit that is bloodthirsty and fierce. And they take that into battle. And if they forge like other type of items, like some sort of a medicine bag around their necks, they're gonna instill a spirit of healing in them, a spirit of nurturing and caretaking and all that sort of stuff. I really like it that in Werewolf it's not just that, especially in Werewolf, it's not that you can't just make a human character and then just add, whoa, and he happens to have the power to turn into a werewolf. No, the werewolf society is so strong, the werewolf's cosmology of the spirit world is so strong, and the tribal politics, social structure, all that is too strong to just brush off. And that's one of the main reasons why those crossover games always tend to be like very forced, because the werewolves wouldn't work well together with all the other ones. You would have to pretty much neglect all of the werewolf society and all that sort of stuff and all their core beliefs if they were to work together with vampires and stuff like that. But that's a different issue altogether. And also the basic cosmology, if you don't know already, the basic cosmology of werewolf is basically the three entities of wild, worm, and the weaver. And worm is the one who destroys everything, while as wild is the one who creates everything, and weaver keeps all those in balance. And those three have like dozens of like subsections to their being of, yeah, the worm isn't only about, destroying everything, and the wild isn't only about creating everything, and the weaver isn't only about keeping those two in balance. There are all sorts of spiritual stuff that I really like, how, these old school kind of like exorcisms and all that, because the basic enemies in this game are minions of the worm, minions of the destroyer of everything, and those are mainly people who have been corrupted by spirit servants of that entity, and they are corrupted, they are turned into fomoris, and they do all this sort of corrupt, wicked stuff. And werewolves can, release the spirit from in them and save the person, and all sorts of rituals having to do with stuff like that are very like visual. They have been described in the book very like clearly, and with also a lot of leeway. And there's also that there's like a list of, okay, here's like couple of rituals, go ahead and make up the rest. And the supernatural powers of the werewolves, their gifts that spirits teach them, there's also an endless amount of those. There's a amount of them in the books, but every single additional like source book you buy, there's a list of new gifts that you can take. So pretty much you can just come up with gifts yourselves and just, you know, come up with the backstory of, okay, what spirit taught you this this gift, and why is it that it's not amongst these common gifts that everybody else knows, and all that sort of stuff. Same with rites to like lift those evil spirits out of people's bodies, rites to send the dead into the spirit world, rites for, you know, for blessing a hunt, rights for this, rights for that, all that sort of stuff are all these very like native type of, you know, these type of stuff where they list like specific little things that you need, like you need this specific root, and you need to do this sort of markings with ink or blood on the forehead of the person you're doing the rite to, and you need to dance around him the whole time that the sun is up endlessly, and chant the glory of Gaia, Mother Earth, who is also a powerful spirit entity that the werewolves worship, as is the moon, Luna, as is the sun, Helios, as is all these spirit stuff. That there's an endless selection of all this good stuff. I got the Book of the Worm, I got the Book of the Wild, I got the Book of the Weaver. Then if that's not enough, I've got books for different shape-shifting animal creatures who have their own cosmologies. And if that's not enough, then there's whole freaking books about them. There's the shape-shifting dinosaurs and sharks and ravens and bears and all this stuff. There's so much stuff, and it has so much leeway. There's so much room for creativity. It's a creative GM's wet dream to run Werewolf and have all this freedom to come up with all this awesome stuff. This is just too cool, man. And yeah, that's why I like Werewolf the Apocalypse the most.